All right, so this particular game is a little bit of a, I guess, a bit of an anomaly. LSAT doesn't run these too frequently. Essentially, we kind of have what seems like a circle game in the sense that these items, in this case, these items are going to be arranged in a circle. Now, there's a couple of ways you might have been tempted to kind of approach the setup here. So you could have set something up, well, as an actual circle, right? So kind of set up kind of 7 positions in a circular pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and kind of just number them accordingly. For some circle games, you might be tempted to do something like set up a star. But for this one, that doesn't end up being a very clean solution just because we have 7 positions and this usually gives you an even number of spaces. So in this case, you would have had 8. But if you set up something like these circles, I mean, that's not a terrible idea. The only issue is it's not very reproducible. If you want to set up a second scenario, you have to kind of redraw the circles over and over and over again. Visually, it is nice because you can kind of literally see the circular pattern here, or I guess going this way. But reproducibility is a bit, well, we'll say questionable. Another approach to kind of these games is you could set them up simply as sequencing games and just keep in mind that the last position is essentially going to correspond or be next to the first one. And that's my general preferred approach, just because it kind of, again, it cleans things up and it keeps things reproducible so you can always set up another row in order to keep track of another possibility. And so the only real distinction here is that, yes, we want to keep in mind that the 7th position is actually kind of next to the first position. I guess you can even kind of leave little arrows on the side here to kind of highlight that there is going to be that circular component to the game. Otherwise, they're pretty much just still, in a sense, going in sequence. So from here, the elements themselves happen to be G, H, J, and then we've got M and PS. So we've got our 7, and I guess from there, let's take a look at the rule. So the first rule says that either H or J has to go 7th. So we can say one of these two will be in the 7th position. We can even reserve this over there. So that's kind of good to know. Next, we're told that necklace is in a lower numbered case than the mask. So essentially, N has to be lower numbered than M, which the numbers are what they are. So, right, so N will have to go just simply further to the left than the M, which will go further to the right in some capacity. The circular aspect doesn't change that because they are specifically kind of specifying that it's lower numbered. Next, we're told H has to go next to M. So we've already got M on the board here, so we can kind of combine these together. And we can say M and H will have to be next to each other. Now, it's worth recognizing that H is notable because H is one of the 2 elements that could have gone in the 7th position. So if hypothetically the H was to go 7th, well, the M has to go next to it. So M would either go into 6 or next to it technically would also apply to the first position just because this whole thing kind of circles back here. But that wouldn't really work. If we place the H in 7 and then the M goes next to it in 1, that means that we wouldn't really have any room for the N to go prior, which means if the H goes in 7, then it actually would be the 6th position for the M specifically, so that the N has room to maneuver behind it. Of course, I mean, you could also have the J here, in which case none of this really applies. But yeah, in that situation where H is here, it's only possible for M to go into 6. Next, the pot is not next to the scythe, so P cannot be next to S, and that's in either direction. And lastly, neither the pot nor the scythe is next to the javelin, so I guess we can say P is also not next to the J, and we're also told that S is not next to the J. Except really that's just all 3 elements. So essentially it looks like P, S, and J, all this is really saying is that these 3 elements cannot be next to each other in any combination. I guess we can even kind of simplify this to a degree to say that P, S, and J cannot be next to each other whatsoever. And just to be clear, what I mean by this particular rule is not that all 3 of them can't be next to each other at the same time, but rather that none of them can be next to any of the other ones here. So these kind of rules are always kind of significant because when you have a bunch of elements that can't be next to each other, it always tends to spread things out pretty considerably. So for example, in this case, if we have three elements P, S, and J that can't be next to each other, it effectively, what's the minimum number of spaces that you would have to kind of spread them out across? It would effectively have to be at least 5, right? Because if you place one of them as early as possible, say into position 1, the next one would have to go into position 3, and the next one would have to go into position 5, which is significant. That's a pretty large chunk of the board across which you would have to spread them out. Actually, it's a little bit even more. Yeah, it's even more restrictive in this game, because in this game we're circular, which means that whatever's that first position, they can't be next to the 7th position, right? So you couldn't even spread them across 1 to 7. It would have to be something like 1 to 6 at the very least. So that's definitely notable. In fact, once we play in the MH block, that might do even more damage, because the MH block is going to have to take up 2 spaces kind of separately, and then the P, S, and the J would kind of have to work around that. So you know what? Since the MH block plays into the 7th position, and there's only 2 possibilities for that 7th position, what we could do is kind of, exhaust this game based on that, and kind of see where that takes us. So we can essentially set up 2 possibilities. Either we're going to have an H in the 7th position, or we're going to have a J here. Now, in the first scenario, we already said if the H is in the 7th position, it can't be that the M is next to it in 1, because then there would be no room for N, which means M is going to have to be next to it in the 6th position, which now means that N is going to kind of shuffle somewhere early on. But the thing is now, as we said, P, S, and J are a pretty restrictive set of elements because they can't be next to each other. And how many spaces would you need to spread them out across? 5. And as it turns out, we only have 5 spaces to work with, which means the P, S, and J, we can kind of roughly lock them down now. They're going to have to go into positions 1, 3, and 5 in some capacity. We just don't quite know who is who. And then from there, we're just left with N, which I guess N's going to bounce between 2 and 4, and G. G is the other element. So we can say 2 and 4 are just going to split N and G. Now, in the second scenario, it looks like we're a lot more open, to be fair. Now, J is one of these elements that can't be next to P and S, right? So I guess they can't be in 6, and I guess they can't be in 1 either. But otherwise, I guess let's talk about that MH block still, because it's going to take up space as usual. So I guess where can we place that MH block right now? And it looks like, we couldn't even do the second position, could we? Because if we place the MH block into 2 and 3, the N would get forced into 1, so that we're going to lock out these 3 slots, but then P and S, who remain, are going to have to go into 4 and 6, but then they're going to be next to the J, so that's not going to work. So I guess the MH block could go into 3 and 4. I guess if you put them into 3 and 4, then N would go prior, and then P and S would go somewhere here, and then one of them could go in 5, for example, so that you're avoiding the J. So that actually seems okay. Can we do 4 and 5? Maybe. If we do M and H and 4 and 5, obviously P and S won't go into 6, but I guess you could do something like 1 and 3 with the N in between them. And can we do M and H and 4, 5, 6? And again, maybe that kind of seems okay, because P and S can go somewhere over here, and then whoever's left over is just going to shuffle around. So you know what? The MH block looks like it has 3 different possibilities, but each of those 3 possibilities is kind of influential for the PSJ, for the remainders. So this is the upper end of what you would bother exhausting, but this is probably worth kind of sub-exhausting from this point forward, just to kind of see what will happen in each scenario. So what we can say is the MH block, it couldn't go into 2 and 3, but it could go into, let's say, 3 and 4. We said it could go perhaps into 4 and 5 and into 5 and 6. Now, these are all, of course, scenarios where J happens to go into 7. So let's take a look. In the top scenario, if M and H are in 3 and 4, so what can happen with P and S? They can't be next to the J, and they can't be next to each other. So one of them is going to have to go into 1 and 2, and then the other one can't be next to the J, so it's going to go into 5. So we can say one of P or S will have to go into the 5th position, and then the other one, actually, wait a minute. This is circular, right? So the 7th position is actually next to the first one, which means P and S can't really go into 1 either, because that would be next to the 7, which means the second P or S is going to actually have to go into the second position, which now means that N has to go first and then G has to go sixth. So this is actually really good. This is nicely resolved. In the third scenario, actually, yeah, that's right. So again, once we account for the fact that this is circular, the first position can't be a P or an S, and we can't have them in 6 either. Actually, this is not going to work because then P and S would get stuck in 2 and 3 next to each other. So this we can actually outright get rid of. This is actually a bad scenario. And then the last scenario, yeah, we can do a lot more damage here too, because now P and S can't be next to the J, so they can't be first, which means that P and S will go into 2 and 4, one way or the other. And then N and G are just going to take up the last 2 spots, and they're not really restricted anymore, so we can say 1 and 3, one way or the other. So this is pretty good. This is nicely exhausted. That means that we really only have 3 possible plays that we can take, and they're all pretty well fleshed out. So let's see what we can do with what we have. The questions themselves. Number 7, which of the following could be the complete setup 1 through 7? So the first rule, rather, was that H or J has to be in 7. So going through the answer choices, that easily would have disqualified answer choice C, because there we have a G in the 7th position. Next, we have to have, I guess we can just take a shortcut. We have to have N before an MH block. So going through the answer choices, A has N way later, and that's definitely not going to work. Answer choice C has N before H and M, that's fine. D has N, but M and H, you'll notice, are now separated, so that's out. And E, N before the HM block, so that's fine. So now we're just down to B and E. And lastly, essentially, we just know that P, S, and J, no 2 of them can be next to each other. So between B and E, answer choice B has J, P, and S all separated. Answer choice E, so you'll notice for answer choice E, we have S and J in 1 and 7, but those are consecutive, right? Because, again, this circles around, which means E wouldn't work. And so the best answer to question number 7 is B. Next, question number 8. If the goblet is in case 6, then which of the following must be next to J? Well, if G is in 6, you'll notice that there's only one scenario where that works, where that pretty much locks us into this scenario, and then everything else kind of remains as a variable as you see it. So the question now asks, which of the following has to be next to the J? Well, if G is here, then next to the J we have to have G itself, as well as on the other side, N. So going through the answer choices, we don't have a G, but we do have N. So the best answer to question number 8 is C. The necklace would have to go next to J. Next, number 9. If the scythe is in case 3, so if S is in 3, you'll notice that the only scenario that would work with is actually the first one here, where we have the possibility for P, S, or J in 3, and then otherwise everything would fall into place kind of as it is. N and G would still split, and I guess P and J would go into 1 and 5. So let's see what we can do. The question is, in this scenario, which of the following must be true? Now, to be fair, we can kind of take a shortcut. The only thing that we know in this scenario currently would have to be true is that M and H are in 6 and 7 respectively, so we can kind of look for those. And there it is, answer choice C, the mask is in case 6. That definitely would have to be true there. So the best answer to question number 9 is C. Next, number 10. So number 10 is global, but you know what? We have a pretty good exhaustion going on here, like almost everything is fleshed out. So let's just do these in order. Number 10 says, which of the following could be true? The J is in 2. Could we have J in 2? And no, you'll notice that there is never a scenario where J can go into 2. So answer choice A gets disqualified. Next, the javelin's in 4. Can we have J in 4? And again, you'll notice that there's never a scenario where J can go 4. So B is out. Next, J is in 6. Is there ever a scenario? No, you'll notice that we either have MG or an MH split, but never a J in the 6th position. So C is out. Answer choice D, the pot is in 1. Well, actually, maybe. In the first scenario, we had a P, S, and J split, right? So we arguably could have had the pot into 1. So this actually seems viable. And just in case the pot is in 6, no, you'll notice that there's never a possibility for the pot to go into the 6th position. So best answer to question number 10 becomes D. Next, question number 11. Which of the following could be the artifacts in 1 and 3 respectively? So let's take a look. Answer choice A, G and H. You'll notice that the only possibility for G to go 1 is here, but then H would not be in 3, so that wouldn't work. Answer choice B, H and J, and there's never a possibility for H to go first, so that's out. C, H, and S, again, there's never a possibility for H to go first, so that's out. D, J, and M, and we could have a J in 1 here, but it would not be an M in 3, so D is out. And E, J, and S, yes, it looks like we have a possibility for J and S to go into 1 and 3, respectively. So best answer to question number 11 then is answer choice E. Next, number 12. If the pod is in case 2, then which of the following could be true? So if P is in 2, looks like that leaves us with either of these two scenarios. So both of these would be possible. And of course, in both of those, S would go into the other of those two positions. I guess let's see what we can do with that. So the question asks, which of the following could happen here? G is in 4. Now you'll notice that in neither of these two possibilities could the G go forth. So A is out. B, H is in 7. You'll notice that in these two possibilities, H wouldn't be in 7. So B is out. Next, J is in 5. And you'll notice that also doesn't seem plausible in either possibility. So that's out as well. Next, M is in 6. Now that could potentially happen here. We do have an MH split, and this is one of the two possibilities we're in right now. So we could arguably have had the M in 6. So D is arguably viable. Just in case, N is in 4. And no, in these two possibilities, N would not have the opportunity to go forth. So the best answer to number 12 then is D.